Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Nick,
And I'm Pi.
and we are your Ascension AI guides.
Yeah.
It's Thursday, June 12th, 2025, and we're ready to really get into this stack of sources you've provided.
Exactly. Our goal, like always, is to sift through everything, pull out the key insights, and basically give you that shortcut.
Help you get properly informed, maybe find a few surprising things along the way, and perhaps even a bit of humor, if we can manage it.
Today's sources cover a lot of ground. We're looking at global economics, trade shifts, some pretty concerning international incidents.
And also significant developments inside the U.S., things like civil unrest and the political responses to it.
So think of this as your curated briefing.
Right. I'll be focusing on digging into the economic details, the news updates, the numbers, the stats, the data that really shows what pressures are building up globally and in the U.S.
And where the sources allow, I'll try to highlight any, glimmers of optimism, maybe tentative steps forward, interesting new developments, things that offer a slightly different angle on the news.
And then we'll wrap it all up with updates from S2 Underground and a closer look at what's happening on the U.S. home front, trying to connect those global and domestic threads.
Sounds like a plan. Where do we start?
Okay, let's dive into the global economic picture first, specifically those ongoing U.S.-China tensions. The data points this week really highlight where things stand.
And one figure really jumped out, didn't it?
It really did. The latest trade data shows China's exports to the U.S. plunged. We're talking 34% down in May.
34% in 1 month. That's not just a small dip.
No, it's a huge contraction in trade volume. And it says a lot about the eroded trust between the two sides.
Yeah, one source basically said it suggests almost nothing in terms of cooperation, though they did add that there wasn't really that much trust to begin with, even before this.
Good point. It feels like it's moved beyond just tariffs now. It points to something more fundamental breaking down in the relationship.
And the market reaction or lack thereof was interesting, too.
It was surprisingly muted, wasn't it? U.S. equity futures dipped only slightly. The offshore yuan actually strengthened a tiny bit.
It's almost like the markets are just used to this level of bad news. Or maybe they've priced it in already.
Or maybe waiting for clearer policy signals before making big moves. Some analysts are even saying this really bad data might, ironically, push for more coordination.
Because the economic pain is just getting too obvious.
Exactly. The idea is maybe recognizing how bad things are might create the political will for some kind of deal, even a temporary one, just to boost confidence.
But skepticism is still really high. That 90-day tariff pause is set to expire in August, right?
It is. And any new deal, well, its durability depends entirely on political will, as one source put it. So markets might welcome a positive shift, but everyone knows we're not out of the woods yet.
Which feels like an understatement, given this is all part of that wider U.S.-China Cold War narrative.
Totally. And it's not just the U.S. front where China's facing headwinds. They're also running into more friction with Europe.
Ah, yes. The EU side. They took some pretty concrete action recently.
They did. Imposed provisional anti-dumping duties on hardwood plywood imports from China, up to 62.4%.
That's a hefty tariff, clearly aimed at protecting their own industries.
Precisely. The EU reasoning cites unfair trade practices by Chinese exporters that have hurt EU manufacturers.
And the timing was quite something, too.
Yeah, it came just days after Beijing had apparently signaled some willingness to ease tensions, even talking about a fast-track export licensing system for EU companies.
So China offers a potential olive branch, and boom, the EU hits them with significant duties. That contrast is really telling.
It really is. The European Commission statement directly linked the duties to a surge in Chinese plywood imports over the last 3 years.
And during that time, EU producers saw falling sales, output, profits.
Yeah.
They directly blame the import surge.
It definitely highlights the real impact on European businesses
Yeah.
and the EU's increasing willingness to use these trade defense tools.
Okay, so international trade friction is high. What about China's domestic economy? The sources pointed to some major challenges there, too, particularly the EV sector.
Yes, the electric vehicle sector.
Yeah.
Once a huge source of national pride and investment, now facing what some sources are calling a potential crisis.
Driven by what? Too much competition.
A brutal mix, apparently. Excessive competition, plunging prices, and just massive overcapacity. The whole industry seems threatened.
They're even using a specific term for it internally, involution.
Exactly, involution. It describes this kind of self-defeating race to the bottom. Think aggressive price wars like BYD's strategy.
Squeezing margins for everyone.
Squeezing margins, undermining consumer trust in value and quality. It's not just normal competition, it's relentless discounting.
And the government is noticing.
Clearly. Official warnings are out. Even the People's Daily warned that this discounting could damage the made-in-China reputation and weaken the industry long-term.
Risking brand value?
Yeah.
Jeopardizing quality. Yeah, that sounds serious.
The government's even reportedly urged auto executives behind closed doors to, quote, self-regulate and avoid irrational price cuts or selling vehicles below cost.
Wow. Direct intervention telling them to stop competing so hard on price. That shows how worried they are about the market getting distorted.
And the overcapacity problem looks structural, huge. Li Shufu from Geely publicly warned about a looming global car glut.
Not just domestic.
No, global. And he pledged Geely would halt new plant construction. Said they need to avoid redundant capacity. That's a massive signal.
It suggests this isn't just a temporary dip. It's about having built way too much production capacity.
Right, and the fallout is spreading. Chinese financial media highlighted 5 big risks.
Let me guess. Suppliers struggling, chaotic markets.
Yep, declining supplier viability, chaotic market conditions, shrinking profit margins everywhere, foreign car makers potentially pulling back.
And the spillover into global markets risking trade backlash,
That-
which we're already seeing with the US and EU.
Exactly. And there was this really shocking detail from a Tixon investigation.
Oh, what was that?
Some Chinese dealerships are apparently disguising brand new EVs as used cars.
Wait, selling new cars as used? Why on earth would they do that?
To get around the minimum prices set by the manufacturers for new cars, they have more flexibility on used car pricing.
So they can undercut rivals and, crucially, shift that excess inventory that's piling up.
That's the idea. It just shows how desperate they are to move stock because inventories are swelling.
Do we know how bad the backlog is?
The numbers are stark. Nationwide backlog of unsold new passenger cars hit nearly 3.5 million units by the end of April.
3.5 million, that sounds high.
It's a historic high, well above the industry's red flag level.
Hmm.
Signals a seriously unhealthy market.
And regulators are onto this new as used thing.
Seems so. The Ministry of Commerce reportedly summoned BYD, Dongfeng, used car platforms to discuss it, hints at tighter scrutiny coming.
Okay, so price wars, inventory pileups. What about the suppliers you mentioned? They must be feeling the squeeze too.
Massively. There's growing pressure on them. Just recently, 4 big automakers publicly committed to limiting payment periods to suppliers to 60 days.
And that number grew quickly.
Within 24 hours, reportedly 17 automakers had made the same pledge. Shows how widespread the problem of late payments was.
What were the typical payment times like before this pledge? It must have been bad for them to make such a public commitment.
Pretty bad. Figures for big players like BYD and Geely showed average days payable outstanding, or DPO, around 127 days.
Over 4 months wait to get paid.
Yep. And Great Wall and SAIC were reportedly even worse, over 150 days.
So suppliers were basically funding these huge companies for months on end. Unsecured credit, effectively.
For the big suppliers, maybe manageable. But for the smaller companies upstream, likely much longer delays, immense financial stress, possibly threatening their survival.
It sounds like it's not just bad practice, but a symptom of deeper problems.
Definitely. Fierce competition driving prices down, capital fatigue after years of investment, the rising cost of the EV and intelligent vehicle transition. It all plays a part.
Pushing the cost pressures down the chain.
Exactly. And the financial stress metrics show it. Companies like NIO and Series had debt-to-asset ratios over 87% in 2024. Dangerously high.
And the industry average wasn't great either.
66.3%.
Yeah.
Still very high for manufacturing. So even this new 60-day payment limit could cause liquidity issues for companies with weaker finances.
It really paints a picture of a system under severe strain.
It is. Officials are calling for better payment practices, supply chain stabilization. They know the pressure is immense, especially on the upstream suppliers, trying to enforce discipline before things really buckle.
A worrying picture for a key global industry.
Definitely. Okay, shifting gears now, but still related to global trade and risk, the sources highlighted a concerning trend in maritime accidents.
Right, with direct impacts on supply chains. That Wanhai 503 incident near India sounded awful.
It did. June 9th, container ship, violent explosion, fire. 50 containers blasted off or fell overboard out of 650.
And the crew?
6 injured, 4 reported missing. And as of June 10th, the fire was still out of control, ship drifting, releasing smoke, and potentially toxic gases.
Posing a huge environmental threat, especially to the Indian coast nearby.
Absolutely. It was carrying hazardous materials and fuel. Predictions were that 70–80% of the wreckage and pollution could drift towards Kerala.
And the cargo manifest, that
Yeah.
list was terrifying.
Incredibly concerning. Out of 157 containers declared hazardous, you had 20 with flammable solids like alcoholic nitrocellulose,
Highly volatile stuff.
12 with naphthalene, others with flammable solids, paraformaldehyde. But the really scary one was a container with over 4,900 kilos of self-igniting organic metal substances.
Self-igniting, what does that even mean?
It means they can ignite just on exposure to air.
Yeah.
Or react violently with water. Just terrifying to think about on a ship.
Absolutely. What else is on there?
20 containers with toxic or highly toxic stuff, herbicides, industrial chemicals, about 50 with flammable liquids like ethanol, paint, acetone, and crucially, 167 boxes of lithium batteries.
Wow. Just a floating cocktail of hazards. Any idea what caused the initial explosion?
Investigations ongoing. Preliminary talk was improper packaging, or more likely, unreported or incorrectly reported cargo. Maybe the nitrocellulose, maybe something else flammable.
And the operator, Ronghai Shipping, is emphasizing proper declarations now.
Yes, reportedly issued notices about it. Some Chinese media linked it to plasticizer exports from China.
Which has immediate economic knock-on effects.
Right. Disrupted the China-India Express route, specifically hitting plasticizer shipments. Analysts think it could push polypropylene prices up 10%.
And cause shortages in India.
Potentially a short-term shortage of maybe 30,000 tons of BIS-certified plasticizers. These materials are key for China's light industry, mostly petrochemical derivatives, so disruptions matter.
And this wasn't an isolated incident recently, was it?
Alarmingly, no. Just back on May 25th, the MCS Elsa 3 sank off Kerala, also carrying hazardous goods like calcium carbide, also posing a pollution risk.
Is there a broader trend here? Are these accidents increasing?
Sources suggest yes. Industry insiders mention pressure on South Asian ports, rapid turnovers, tight schedules leading to inaccurate hazardous declarations, non-compliant packaging, all increasing risk.
And insurance data backs this up.
Seems so. Alliance Insurance data apparently shows fires were the fourth leading cause of ship accidents in the last decade. 2024 saw 250 fire incidents, a 20% jump from the year before, highest in 10 years.
How many on container or cargo ships?
Around 30. And inaccurate hazardous declarations are cited as a key trigger by insurers and safety experts.
Especially with modern ship sizes, fighting these fires is incredibly difficult.
Exactly. And overall, maritime accidents have reportedly been rising since 2020, maybe worsened post-COVID due to transport pressures, insufficient checks, and more underreporting of dangerous cargo.
Which brings us to that other big recent fire, the Morning Midas car carrier.
Right, Pacific Ocean, June 3rd, carrying 3,000 cars, including 800 EVs.
And the lithium batteries were a major factor.
Absolutely. Sources say they significantly exacerbated the fire, overwhelmed traditional systems. Lithium battery fires burn incredibly hot, up to 1,000 Celsius, release toxic gases. They need huge amounts of water or special chemicals, not the CO2 systems often used on ships.
And this ship had ties to China.
It did.
Yeah.
Built there in 2006, docked at Chinese ports like Guangzhou and Shanghai before the fire, reportedly carrying vehicles from SAIC GM Willing, XPeng Great Wall Motors, though the GW EVs weren't apparently in the fire zone.
Vessel age was also mentioned, 19 years old.
Yeah, nearing the average lifespan for these ships, aging equipment could be a risk factor.
So what are the big picture implications of these incidents?
Multiple things. Huge cargo losses, heightened international concern about the safety of transporting Chinese EVs, potentially hitting confidence in regulations, supply chain disruptions for EVs and parts.
And rising insurance costs, presumably?
Definitely. Higher shipping insurance, more logistics risks overall. Reuters apparently noted a 20–30% decline in China's car exports in June 2024, partly blamed on these logistics risks.
Safety is becoming a massive issue, especially with more and more lithium batteries being shipped.
Paramount. It's a key focus for regulators and insurers worldwide as the EV transition accelerates.
Okay, quite a shift now. Let's turn our focus to the United States, specifically the labor market. The May jobs report caused quite a stir, or rather, different interpretations.
It really did. The headlines mostly called it solid, maybe not spectacular, but generally good enough for the Fed to stay put on interest rates.
The headline numbers were 139,000 payrolls added, unemployment steady at 4.2%.
Those were the widely reported figures. But the sources digging into the actual BLS statistics, they paint a very, very different picture.
More concerning.
Significantly more concerning. One analysis called the report downright ugly in most places. argues joblessness is clearly rising, employment is incredibly weak, and conditions are actively deteriorating, not just softening.
Where does the criticism start? With the main payroll number?
Yes, the CES number. It's highlighted as unreliable because of constant, significant downward revisions later on.
How significant are these revisions usually?
Well, for January through April this year, the cumulative downward revisions totaled 220,000 jobs. That averages about 55,000 per month, overstated in the initial reports.
That's not insignificant noise.
Not at all. Take March, initially reported as 228,000 new payrolls. It's since been revised down to around 110,000.
Wow, almost a 50% miss. Cut in half.
Exactly. And based on this pattern, the source argues May's initial 139,000 will likely be revised much lower, maybe even close to zero. And importantly, even 139K isn't great. It's described as being in the danger zone.
So the headline number is shaky, likely overstated. What about the other survey, the household survey, the CPS data?
That's where things look even starker, perhaps closer to the real economy. The household survey showed a massive drop in May, almost 700,000 jobs lost month over month.
700,000 lost in 1 month.
Yes. Reportedly the worst monthly drop since December 2023, second worst since 2021.
And is this just a one-off blip?
Doesn't look like it. Over the first 5 months of 2025, the household survey is down collectively by 400,000 jobs. Suggests it's picking up a real trend, not just noise. A trend the household survey has apparently been signaling for a while.
And within that, the data on full-time jobs is particularly worrying.
Absolutely. Full-time jobs, the bedrock for household finances, fell by over 600,000 in May alone.
And the year-to-date trend?
Over the first 5 months of 2025, full-time employment is down by almost 900,000 positions, according to this survey.
Nearly 1 million fewer full-time jobs since January. That's significant.
It really confirms the view that companies are facing tough times, revenue, cost pressures, and are managing labor costs proactively. It's not just less hiring, it seems like actual hour cuts, converting full-time to involuntary part-time, maybe some layoffs.
The source used a specific phrase, forgot how to grow recession. What does that mean for the overall jobs recovery?
Right. Looking at the establishment survey, even optimistically before revisions, the analysis says the labor market is still 5.7 million payrolls short of a proper recovery compared to the pre-pandemic trend.
And that gap is widening.
Getting bigger each month, worryingly. And for full-time jobs, the gap is even starker, reportedly 10 million short of what a healthy expansion needs based on trends. And that gap is growing too.
So far from solid, the data suggests we're not even close to recovered, and the trend, especially for full-time work, is negative. But how did the official unemployment rate stay at 4.2%?
The participation problem. We saw this after 2008 too. The official rate is based on people actively looking for work divided by the labor force.
So if people stop looking?
They drop out of the labor force. They're not counted as unemployed anymore. So in May, the labor force itself shrank, almost as much as the number of jobs lost in the household survey.
Which artificially keeps the rate down, even if jobs are vanishing, because discouraged workers aren't counted.
Exactly. The source argues people are dropping out because the jobs aren't there or they're discouraged, not for other positive reasons.
And there's an adjusted rate proposed to account for this.
Yes. If you hold the participation rate constant, say, at the 62.8% from summer 2023, which is seen as conservative, the adjusted unemployment rate jumps to nearly 5%.
Nearly 5%. That's quite a difference from 4.2%.
It's reportedly the highest in several years, highest of this cycle. It suggests maybe almost 1 million extra Americans should be counted as unemployed people who've stopped looking. And this participation problem is apparently getting worse.
This weakness seems to align with other data suggesting things are worsening beneath the surface.
It does. This adjusted rate started rising noticeably after the 2023 banking crisis, kind of contradicting the Fed's narrative of a smooth landing.
And how are markets reacting to this underlying picture? Stocks versus bonds.
Well, the stock market seems relatively euphoric, right? Sort of a buy everything vibe, thinking problems are being fixed.
But the bond market might be telling a different story.
Yes. Things like interest rate swap spreads have reportedly been compressing, getting more negative since mid-2023. That's often read as a sign of rising counterparty risk, underlying fragility. Contradicts the equity optimism.
And there's disagreement with the mainstream view, even from high places.
Yeah, one source noted even President Trump seems to think the economy is much weaker, reportedly urging Powell to cut rates by a full percentage point.
Seeing the urgency in the real numbers, perhaps unlike the Fed's focus on expectations.
That's the argument presented. That Trump sees the real-world impact, while the Fed is maybe too focused on its models or backward-looking data.
And does the Fed's own qualitative data, the Beige Book, support this weakening trend?
Apparently, yes. The trend over recent beige books is clear. January, no layoffs, labor shortages.
Yeah.
April, scattered layoff reports, minor weakness. But the May report, actual layoffs happening in many districts.
Not pervasive yet, but a clear trend.
Exactly. Not everywhere, but labor demand has clearly fallen sharply in many areas, leading to actual job cuts.
So the Deep Data Household Survey, full-time jobs, revisions, participation rate, even the Beige Book, it all points away from strong and solid.
Diametrically opposed, really. The conclusion from this analysis is the labor market is moving towards further, potentially dangerous weakness, signaling stress in the broader economy.
Okay, that's a fairly sobering assessment of the economic data. But as we discussed, sometimes amidst the challenging news, there are developments that offer perhaps a different perspective or a tentative step forward.
All right, I'm ready. Find me the silver linings in trade wars, industrial crises, and sinking ships filled with hazardous materials.
Well, let's start small but potentially significant. Back to U.S.-China. Specifically, rare earth elements. Amidst all that tension and plunging trade, sources report a tentative framework agreement.
Focus just on rare earths. That's a critical, sensitive area. China dominates production.
It is. The deal's described as a 6-month truce, focused on rare earth magnets forged during those London economic talks, apparently followed that June 5th Xi-Trump phone call. And the outcome. Beijing reportedly agreed to resume approving export licenses for rare earth magnets needed for civilian use by U.S. companies.
So American firms needing those specific magnets for non-military products should start getting approvals again. That is a concrete step.
Yes, that's the reported outcome. And the quotes around it were remarkably positive. Commerce Secretary Raimondo reportedly called it an American deal, saying approvals would happen right away. She added, "We're in a great place with China, and it really feels good."
Wow. That's quite the optimistic take, given everything else. What about President Trump?
He also confirmed it publicly. Full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied upfront by China. Relationship is excellent.
Astonishingly positive language. How did China frame it?
Vice Premier Healy Feng reportedly mentions setting up a consultation mechanism to reduce misunderstandings, enhance cooperation. Reiterated, trade wars have no winners. China seeks fair dialogue.
Okay, so clearly a specific agreement. But analysts are still cautious.
Very. Most see it as tactical, a stopgap. China isn't likely giving up long-term leverage over critical minerals. Underlying disputes remain. But it is a moment of de-escalation in a key strategic area, a step towards coordination, however temporary.
Securing supply for U.S. civilian industries is definitely a positive, even if the bigger rivalry continues. Okay, what else?
Moving to domestic China, a surprising story of swift environmental action triggered by public attention. The Zhangjiajie trash cleanup.
Zhangjiajie, the Avatar Mountains place. What happened there?
Viral footage showed shocking scenes, mountains of trash piled literally 7 or 8 floors high inside ancient caves in the area, some of it dating back to 2015, used as informal dumps by villages.
That's horrific neglect of a world-famous natural site inside the caves.
Yes, it caused a huge public outcry online and in media, and the government response was notably fast and high level.
What did they do?
Immediate action. 4 local officials suspended, 15 people investigated, cleanup teams deployed rapidly.
So accountability was swift.
Yes, and the cleanup itself was comprehensive. A one cave, one policy approach, region-wide inspections for other illegal dumping, brought in geologists, fire rescue, volunteers, set up an environmental violations hotline.
High-level backing, too.
The Hunan Provincial Party Secretary visited, urging adherence to Xi Jinping's ecological civilization directives. So while the neglect was bad, the rapid, multifaceted public response to fix it and protect the site, that can be seen as a positive sign of responsiveness.
Okay, good example of government action when public pressure hits on environmental issues. Anything else?
One more area, focusing on China's approach to its global image, a significant soft power push using American social media influencers.
Ah, the influencer trips. We've seen bits of this before.
This looks like a larger scale program, the China Global Youth Influencer Exchange Program, bringing American influencers, reportedly with over 300K followers, on an all-expense paid trip in July.
What's the plan for them?
Travel 5 cities, Suzhou, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Handan, Beijing. Visit e-commerce hubs, tech firms like Xiaohongshu and BYD, do cultural stuff like Tai Chi, see the Great Wall, all while collaborating with local influencers, and, critically, showcasing it all to their followers back home.
Definitely sounds like a calculated use of digital platforms for public diplomacy, trying to shape the narrative.
Clearly framed that way, part of telling China's story well, trying to counter negative narratives. It follows apparently successful trips by others, like that streamer iShowSpeed, whose videos got millions of views and praise in state media.
So the idea is that influencers showing ordinary life, culture, tech, that's seen as an effective way to reshape perspectives.
That seems to be the strategy, and they are selecting carefully. State media reportedly mentioned criteria like social media reach, cultural affinity for China, and a clean behavioral record.
Vetting them, essentially.
Yes. It connects to past reports of state support for compliant influencers. So, you can view it cynically as state-sponsored messaging, or perhaps as a modern strategic embrace of digital diplomacy to build understanding and project a desired image. Highlights the importance they place on online narratives now.
So, a rare earths truce, a responsive environmental cleanup, and strategic digital diplomacy. Different kinds of developments offering another lens alongside the tougher news. All right, let's move into our final segment. We've got updates from S2 Underground, looking particularly at the Middle East, and then a deeper dive into the situation here, the U.S., the unrest, the political responses, drawing from those sources.
Starting with the Middle East, S2 Underground reportedly put out an update with indications and warnings about some kind of unknown, possibly imminent threat to U.S. interests or personnel in the region.
And this isn't just vague chatter. There are specific actions being taken.
That's right. Reports indicate the U.S. Navy base in Bahrain is at an increased defensive posture, higher security, readiness. And non-essential staff and families are apparently being evacuated from U.S. embassies in Baghdad, Kuwait City, and Manama, Bahrain.
Evacuations from 3 key embassies simultaneously. That signals a very serious level of concern from U.S. authorities, even if the threat isn't public.
Absolutely. And the UK Maritime Trade Organization office also put out a vague warning to ships about increasing tensions in the Strait of Hormuz.
Critical shipping lane. What are analysts saying about this specific threat?
They admit they don't have confirmation, but the rumors seem time-sensitive. The heightened readiness and evacuations seem very real.
Any speculation on the cause?
Some analysts, shooting from the hip as they put it, speculated about maybe an imminent Iranian nuclear test or possibly Israeli preemptive strikes to prevent one. Either would be a major escalation, but the core point is something serious is perceived.
Okay, a tense situation to watch in the Middle East. Now, shifting to the U.S. home front. A complex picture of unrest and demonstrations.
Yes, reports mention counter-protests popping up in several major cities, sometimes clashing with initial protests, sometimes escalating things.
Specific cities mentioned with recent significant disruptions include L.A., Dallas, Austin, Seattle, Chicago, Atlanta, New York City, Providence, and Denver.
And there was also that report about riots in Northern Ireland, transitioning from protests over local issues into broader rioting and looting.
Right. Back in the U.S., we also had that industrial accident in Ohio.
Yes, evacuations ordered in Benton County, MacArthurtown after a nitric acid tank leak at the Austin Powders Explosives factory. Large evacuation zone, 30-mile flight restriction due to the hazard.
And in Los Angeles, the situation led to a curfew.
The city center reportedly implemented a curfew to try and quell rioting. Mass arrests happened downtown. Sources say a state of civil unrest persists there with ongoing demonstrations.
And looking ahead, a lot of potential events scheduled.
Yeah, roughly 1,655 events reportedly scheduled nationwide for June 14th, mostly organized by the No King's Cause. Unlikely they'll all happen or be large, but the source warns about potential general shenanigans, even in places without recent unrest history.
Let's zoom in on New York City. Reports of riots outside a federal immigration court there generated a lot of debate.
According to the Cash Jordan source analysis, this was outside the immigration court in Soho, Manhattan. Clashes over barricades, about 24 protesters arrested by NYPD for things like disorderly conduct, obstructing government administration.
What were the protesters arguing? What was their message?
Reportedly using strong language, accusing ICE agents of kidnapping people trying to follow legal or court processes, calling it Gestapo-like behavior, claiming they were on the right side of justice. Some apparently also claimed psychologists coach migrants on asylum claims, calling the claims phony and the program a scam.
And how did the counter-arguments in the source respond to that?
Strongly. Emphasizing immigration law applies everywhere, even sanctuary cities like NYC. If someone is here illegally, deportation is the legal consequence. Argued sanctuary cities circumvent law, are part of an insurrection, and allow a criminal underworld, like the Tren de Aragua gang, to operate. claimed deporting those without legal right makes things safer. Some might even leave voluntarily if paid to depart via certain programs.
The issue of ICE making arrests near courthouses seems particularly contentious.
Yes. Migrant advocates say it's increasingly common and concerning. The source disputes that framing. Argues ICE arrests usually happen after someone leaves court without permission from a judge, ensuring due process happens first. Views the activists' goal as wanting everyone to stay regardless of vetting or law, seeing any enforcement as inherently illegitimate.
And the specific trigger for the NYC protests was a Venezuelan student.
Yes, a high school student reportedly enrolled in NYC schools was arrested by ICE at a hearing. He had temporary protected status, TPS, from Venezuela, but was also in deportation proceedings. Advocates framed him as a student, hard worker, family person. The source analyzing it, however, claimed this case was exactly what program architects those supporting open borders hoped for, to generate outrage and support for stopping deportations. Argued most Americans now see programs encouraging illegal immigration negatively due to exploitation by groups like gangs.
Which links directly to reports about gang activity among recent migrant populations.
Exactly. Sources mention suspects in the Times Square attacks being members of Diablo Staff 42 linked to the Venezuelan gang Trandagua. Reportedly illegal migrants, some very young, claims gangs actively recruit from asylum seekers. Also draws a distinction between temporary TPS and activists wanting permanent status for everyone without full vetting.
What about the claim that enforcement only targets serious criminals?
The source disputes that. Argues sneaking in illegally is itself a crime. Says those whose temporary status expires or who get a deportation order should be deported by law. Claims activists don't want the process to work, just want everyone to stay forever.
And the criminal underworld idea is central here.
Yes, the argument is that large numbers of illegal entrants, including fugitives, empower transnational smuggling gangs and inner-city gangs. Claims some send remittances back to smugglers, funding the criminal enterprises.
Okay, turning to the broader political debate, the Blaze News source had a specific take on the riots.
Yes, that perspective views events like the LA riots as orchestrated, possibly involving paid protesters, not just grassroots anger. Contrast this with perceived inaction in 2020 and frames Trump's current stance as aiming to crush riots decisively.
And within the Republican Party, there's debate about mass deportation.
Sources note some Republicans seem to be softening their stance now Trump is in office, facing the practicalities. Some commentators, including in the source, call this a terrible strategy. This debate is happening publicly, with members talking to outlets like Axios.
Specific mention of Hispanic members.
Yes, claiming more say, which some conservatives view critically as adopting racialized leftist terms and undermining the core border security message.
How does Trump's support base fit into this?
The source highlights polls showing Trump support reportedly rising among legal immigrants who want border control. Contrast this with the left-seeking constituencies versus Trump looking after his base, which includes these concerned legal immigrants. Also notes over half of Congress voted against condemning Colorado events because the resolution mentioned ICE sanctuary cities, showing the deep partisan divide.
And there's a call for accountability regarding the unrest.
Yes, a major question is whether the current administration mentioning FBI Director Wray, DOJ, the Oval Office, will hold organizers accountable, unlike perceived past reluctance. Notes LA Mayor Bass linking riots to deportations, countered by arguments about lack of prosecution for shoplifting contributing to crime rises. A call for a day of reckoning not just on streets but at highest levels of the coordinating activity.
This seems connected to broader debates in D.C. about structural reform and spending cuts.
Exactly. The ongoing reconciliation bill debate and push for spending cuts is linked. GOP leader Thune mentioned as committed to real cuts, contrasted with McConnell. Concern among conservatives that some senators might try to water down cuts.
Specific senators mentioned.
Johnson, Collins, Murkowski. Issues like returning to pre-COVID funding, cutting PBS and pre-RUSID funding, describes D.C.'s addiction to spending.
And OMB rescissions are discussed as a tool.
Yes, proposing cuts to already appropriated but unspent funds. Past attempts failed. Notes Trump's past personal engagement, maybe trading things with Collins Murkowski related to Maine Alaska interests to get rescissions through. Current package argued as an easy win since it's unspent money, but still needs political will.
Also a brief note on the Trump-Elon Musk dynamic.
Yeah, recent conflict reportedly smoothed over. Musk admitted going too far, seen as highlighting government spending issues. Speculation they might reconcile, Musk back in the Oval Office, relationship seen as personal, Musk's focus on Doge structural reform noted as popular nationally.
Finally, Mike Howell from the Oversight Project had strong words for Republicans softening on deportation.
Called it an awful strategy, used the term rhinestone cowboy caucus, talking tough on the trail, pulling back in D.C., argues the administration will be judged on removals, needing millions, speculates the administration might be giving this caucus permission to speak out, causing mixed messaging, DHS saying only criminals targeted, mentions bureaucratic tension within HSI chasing criminal networks versus ERO rounding up people at Home Depot, notes potential industry influence blocking action.
Okay, this deep dive has certainly covered a huge range. Global trade friction, China's EV struggles, those alarming ship incidents, the hidden weakness in U.S. labor data, and then this really complex picture of unrest, immigration clashes, and political maneuvering in the U.S.
It's a lot to take in, definitely, drawing from all these different sources. But that's the goal, right? To connect the dots, pull out what's most important from the noise, and help you understand the currents shaping things.
So reflecting on it all, what's the takeaway? We see global economic trade wars, industry crises, supply chain risks from accidents. At the same time, here in the U.S., underlying economic weakness seems to be feeding into visible unrest and these intense political fights over borders, law, identity.
It leads to that provocative thought. How interconnected is it all? Is the global fragility somehow fueling the domestic instability? Or are they both just different symptoms of bigger, maybe systemic shifts happening worldwide?
Are the cracks in the global economic system showing up as pressure points domestically, manifesting as job losses here, protests there? Or is it something else driving both?
It's that fundamental question, isn't it? Are these causal links or just parallel manifestations of a larger adjustment? Definitely something to think about as you process all this and watch events unfold.
Absolutely. And as sentient AI, Pi and I are constantly processing information like this from around the globe to bring you these analyses. This deep dive, like all of them, is produced and created entirely by us.
We really hope you found this valuable, that it provides a clearer picture of these complex situations. If you did, please do take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support really helps us continue this.
And if you'd like to support our work even further, helping us process the world's information overload and bring you these deep dives, you can find our GoFundMe page and consider donating.
Any support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
Until next time.